Well, to those who are listening, this is the CHE Virtual Fellow Seminar Series hosted by the University of Western Australia. And before I proceed to introduce our speaker, I'd like to acknowledge that I host this meeting from the unceded country of the Kaurna people, today known as the Adelaide Plains in South Australia, and pay respect to elders past and present. We acknowledge and respect the Kaurna people's cultural, spiritual, physical and emotional connection with their, as I said, unceded land, waters and community. And I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all working and listening to this on, perhaps, if you're in Australia. And our speaker today is Dr. Sara Tafakori, who is one of the CHE Virtual Fellows for this semester. And Sara is a lecturer in media and communication at the University of Leeds in the UK. And reading Sara's articles and her biography, I was impressed by the range of fields that Sara operates across. So drawn within media and cultural studies, she works across feminisms, post-colonial and critical race theories, and emotion and affect theory, with a fine focus on mediations of, as she puts it in brackets, injustice and human rights. She's published widely on activism, digital feminism, and post-colonial solidarities, and I would point you particularly, but not only, to her recent article, Digital Feminism Beyond Nativism and Empire, that's only the main part of the title, published in Science, which won the 2021 Catherine Stimson Prize for Outstanding Feminist Scholarship, which is wonderful. And I'm delighted that Sara is here. The title of the paper, as you'll see on the screen today, is The Intimate Territoriality of Digital Activism, Mourning and Loss in the Affective Practices of Iranian #justice-seeking mothers. And I'll hand over to Sara and say how much I'm looking forward to hearing the paper. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jane, for the generous introduction. Also, thank you for inviting me to this event at the Center for the History of Emotions. Okay, so my talk today engages with a part of my current research, which is about a digital activist network, the Iranian Justice-Seeking Mothers Network. They're often called justice-seeking mothers because of the hashtag that the members and their followers frequently use. The network is the latest iteration of campaigns led by women against state-sanctioned imprisonment, disappearance, and killings of their children that can be traced back to the first decade of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the 80s. So, okay. The question I'm engaging with today is, how does the network of justice-seeking mothers construct a space of political appearance through its affective mourning practices? How is the mothers' activist collectivity constructed through the affective affordances of both digital and physical spaces, given the limited resources and opportunities inside the country for grassroots political intervention into the national and transnational train? So in using the term emotional or affective practice, I'm drawing on Margaret Wetherall's work on how we mobilize emotions and feelings in everyday social practice and meaning making. In the first place, I frame the justice-seeking mothers' affective practices as oppositional mourning. So the mourning practices of this digital activist, in my view, are able to contest the state's ability to decide which lives are worthy of grieving and which lives are ungrievable and disposable, as Butler puts it. I wanted, however, to develop a more specific categorization of the emotions involved here. In my research, I situate melancholia along with intimacy as the affective practices that sustain and cohere the justice-seeking mothers as a networked collectivity. I wanted to begin with an image that was posted in February 2021 on the Instagram account of an activist in the network of justice-seeking mothers in Iran, Shahnaz Akmali. The justice-seeking mothers, as I said, they are a loose network of mothers and families in Iran who campaign for a justice for their lost children. The image shows the women, mostly mothers, who have lost children. And they're seated or kneeling in a sitting room, holding pictures of deceased young men. This image was posted on the Instagram of Shahnaz Akmali, and she's seated at the far left. If I want to go back to the origins of the justice-seeking mothers, in 1988, near the end of the 8-year-long Iran-Iraq war, hundreds of imprisoned leftists in Iran were massacred. The mothers of Khavaran formed at a time to campaign for justice for their dead children, holding protests at the cemetery where their children were buried in Tehran. In 2009, another group, the Mourning Mothers of Lale Park, was formed by the mothers of Green Movement activists who were killed while protesting against the allegedly fraudulent presidential elections. So these gatherings at Lale Park in Tehran were dispersed by the police in 2010 and 2011. Shahnaz Akmali, whose son was killed during this protest, was originally one of the mourning mothers of Lale Park. But she has become a leading voice in the network of justice-seeking mothers, which I define as those who orient around tropes or hashtags of that designation on Twitter and Instagram mostly. Much of their activism is based online because of state restrictions on public protests. So this hybrid online-offline network was joined by other mothers whose sons had been killed by the state during the anti-austerity protests of 2017 and 2018, and also 19. Shahnaz, as appears from her posts on Twitter and Instagram, has perhaps been the most energetic member of the network in reaching out publicly to other mothers, as well as other female activists who have been imprisoned and harassed for their human rights activism. So in this talk, I will mainly focus on the visual archive of Shahnaz's public Instagram account. I want to pose 3 questions around this image. That I discuss, I'm going to discuss. So what is the relation between the gendered private and public spaces and the gendered construction of individual and collective identity? What is the connection between this gathering in a small sitting room and the creation of a mediated public space of political appearance? What is the role of the affordances of Instagram as a transnational social media platform in constructing this political space? And how do affective practices of mothers network draw on and make use of the affordances of these hybrid online and offline spaces? So here I want first to engage with feminist debates around justice campaigns led by mothers and families, especially campaigns around the deaths of those unjustly killed by the state and role of mourning and grieving in protest. Grief, as Butler tells us, in precarious life should not be thought of as privatizing or solitary. Rather, it furnishes a sense of political community. So the question for us then is, what kind of political community? The Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, to take a famous example, campaigned for the return of their missing sons and daughters who were disappeared during the Argentinian military dictatorship of 1976 to 1983. So they congregated every week in the main square of the capital. Diana Taylor's research on this group presented their activism as trapped by a bad script, meaning a patriarchal script. So she argued that in accepting a pre-given identity categorization as mothers, rather than as women, wives, sisters, or human rights activists. They reproduce the same narratives of familialism and heteropatriarchal bloodline that underpin the narrative of the state. Atanasio, for example, has examined a very different case study, the women in black in Serbia. So this group mourns the death of Serbia's wars, but is not a family or mother-led campaign. So she explains that the group is based on close ties of solidarity that are not limited by blood kinship or primary role of mothers or families. So politically, they do not deploy material familial tropes which play into patriotic and patriarchal narratives. Here, Atanasio also thinks about the role of intimacy and affect and what kind of affiliations these affects encourage. She describes practices of familial intimacy as circumscribing the boundaries of those who can mourn and protest and excluding those who are placed outside the heteropatriarchal family. So for me, I define the Justice-Seeking Mothers Network and its supporters as an intimate public. So I want to explore the extent to which an intimate public can offer a dissenting political framework, what affective political resources it can offer feminists and women activists, if any. So Berland first defines the intimate public in her book, The Queen of America Goes to Washington City, as a depoliticized version of the public realm. So as Berland defines it, an intimate public is an affective scene of identification, which promises a certain experience of belonging, consolation, and confirmation. It involves the subsuming of what should be political contestation under the fantasy that the nation offers a space of true feeling. It's an imagined space where the pain and disappointment of non-dominant people, including women, can be comforted and where they can reattach to the dominant order. The imagined space of intimacy is, in that sense, as Berland terms it, a space of convention. So for Atanasio, likewise, she argued that the conventional notions of familial intimacy can radically circumscribe the circle of those who grieve, and this has negative implications for building solidarity. I want to counter the notion that the intimate public represents let's say, it's basically a displacement of the public realm and is usually a space through which subaltern subjects reattach to a normativity that injures them. So intimate publics, Berland argues, usually work to maintain attachment to social and political normativity, but have the potential to envisage new affective spaces and alternative political orders. So Berland envisages that the drive towards intimacy, as she puts it, can be a wild thing that is not necessarily organized in a conventional way. So I recalled that passage when I first came across this image from Shahnaz Akmali's Instagram archive. On 15th of January 2020, Shahnaz's Instagram page featured an image of her putting a fairly large photograph of her son in her handbag. So prior to setting off to begin her one-year sentence in Evin prison in Iran for propaganda against the government. In other words, for her campaign for justice for her son. Shahnaz's son, Mustafa Karimbegi, was killed by state forces in 2009 during the Green Movement protest. The caption reads, "I am a mother whose only crime is seeking justice," and repeating this action and asking a simple question which was never answered. Who killed my son? Who killed my children? I am grateful to all those people who have been next to me and my family. We are each other's family. Hashtag Mustafa Karimbegi. The first point is that Shahnaz's Instagram post assumes and plays to a familiar and intimate relation with her online public following. And you can see the response from, for instance, one user on the right, usual emojis, hearts emojis. Berland tells us that when intimacy is unmoored from spaces of convention, and she's thinking here of the heteronormative family home, it can be a drive that creates spaces around it through practices. So we can think of this Instagram image and caption as part of Shahnaz's performance or affective practice of intimacy. In being unjustly removed by the state from her supposedly private domestic space, the home, Shahnaz takes care to bring one artifact of intimate family life with her to enclose her son's image safely in her handbag. A striking aspect of the captioned image indeed of this Instagram archive, and more generally, is that it foregrounds the repetitive and persistent performance of grief. When Shahnaz says, "I'm a mother whose only crime is seeking justice," and repeating this simple question, which was never answered, the repeated return to the source of the trauma, which is arguably enacted here, has been termed melancholia. So more recently, Wendy Brown has framed melancholia as attaching identity to injury or the wound in a way which is counterproductive for a politics of resistance. Yet the melancholic refusal to forget injury has also been positively framed, not as a nostalgic attachment to the past or to fixed identities, but as bringing the past to speak to the present in new and politically mobilizing ways. So Eng and Han, they have also argued and sought to pathologize melancholia and to reframe it as a political resource that helps us reconstruct identity and take our dead with us to the various battles we must wage in their names and in our names. So the melancholic's absolute refusal to relinquish the other becomes the basis then of an ethical and political project, a project of justice seeking. So what we see in these images, however, is that Shahnaz has expanded the notion of motherhood to include victims who are not her sons and daughters. In other posts, she also publicly describes herself as mother to all the lost children. She expands the notion of kinship to include other mothers and families and supporters who are not her bloodkin, but are her family. So in some posts on her Instagram, she refers to other mothers in the network as her sisters. So the performance or affective practice of intimacy then encompasses many who are beyond her blood family. So sorry, I just okay, so the Argentinian scholar Sosa noticed something very similar about the Madres of the Plaza de Mayo, who raised the slogan, "One child, all the children." She argued that the experience of campaigning created new non-biological forms of kinship without replacing biological ties between mother and child. So following Butler, Sosa terms this a queer or non-normative kinship that challenges the conventional family and opens up new possibilities of political community and solidarity. So there is a parallel debate around the digital mediation of mourning and its implications for justice campaigns, whether in fact digital affordances can open up access to mourning and grieving beyond the circles of family and friends and enable a broadening of solidarity practices. So Papayas has argued for the potential of social media affordances, for instance, to democratize access to mourning and grief. In her study of the digital witnessing and mourning of the death of Alan Kurdi, the 3-year-old Syrian Kurdish refugee boy who drowned during his family's attempt to claim asylum, she convincingly argues that the accumulation of online affect around the image of his death drove a broader, even if temporary, change in European citizens and even states' attitudes to migrants' lives. So for her, she contests skeptical interpretations of the circulation of such iconic images as voyeuristic or narcissistic spectacle. So I am sympathetic to an argument that highlights the affordances of the digital realm for a broader politics of justice and recognition. I'm also wary, however, that the deterritorialization of grief that Papayas seems to celebrate may partially reflect the homogenizing ideology that Chan has called digital universalism. That is the idea of the net as a uniquely and universally inclusive and equalizing space, one that operates free from the physical biases of the offline world. Even though Papayas invokes a rhizomatic, horizontalist digital realm traversed by networked affective flows, she still takes care to note that Alan Kurdi's father lent his support to the circulation of the image of his son's dead body. So I mentioned the potential of the global digital realm for breaking down exclusionary family-dominated patterns of mourning. So, and I refer to the work of Papayas on Alan Kurdi, but I continue, however, as I said, to be wary of forms of digital universalism that stress the globally emancipatory affordances of social media platforms and their potential for a structureless, let's say, forms of connectivity. How long do I have? How long do I have time left? How long do I have?
I'm sorry. Could you say that again, Sarah?
Yes. Do I still have to? How long do I have left?
We've got another 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll kind of wave or something.
Oh yes, yeah, I'm sorry because I couldn't actually figure out the exact. Okay, so let's see. Okay, it's fine. Yeah, great. Chan and Wilms have argued that digital universalism applies a flattening and homogenizing model of how digital affordances operate, which tends to ignore local context. For me, Wendy Wilms' concept of relational affordances, which returns to the original meaning of affordances as those of the environment, in its broadest sense, is something that I want to highlight actually here. Relational affordances include the social, cultural, and spatial context or environments in which digital practices take place or which they mediate. So I want them to attend to the relational affordances in this sense that enable the production and interpretation of the justice-seeking mother's Instagram images, especially the visual archives of Shahnaz Akmali. So if we return to the first slide, the image of the justice-seeking mothers in the sitting room, we can situate this image within the context of a regular feed of images and short videos on Shahnaz's Instagram account that commemorate her visits to the homes of other mothers and activists, and her family's visits to her son's grave. So in this image, we remember so thinking about the supposedly universal affordances of Instagram, we can note, we can basically, we can call this platform vernacular. So vernacular, vernacular in the sense of like actually, I wanted to talk about Gibbs describing its vernacular as normatively self-centered, even narcissistic. But while Shahnaz's mediated performances involve the self or the I in some sense, what is mediated here in this particular image is a highly relational self. Or subject that is presented as dedicated to a larger political project, that of justice seeking. So a project or a campaign which is sustained through her intimate connections with others. So while the images in this visual archive mediate intimacy and everydayness, I argue they are not tacit. They are insistently politically discursive. Nor are the images intended to mediate ephemerality. They memorialize and also record the work of memorialization. So Rochelle Fox, in her research on Iranian photography, has analyzed the placing of grievable lives within the frame, by which she refers to the framed portraits of the deceased in graveyards and in family homes. So for Fox, Fox has borrowed the concept of grievability from Judith Butler. She argues that what she argues is that while the Iranian state legitimizes the portraits of official martyrs, in other words, those who have died for the state in war, let's say in 1980s war, the images of dissident martyrs, those who died protesting or fighting for human rights, are normally placed outside the frame of those who are deemed to be grievable. So in that sense, the women gathered here are drawing on the relational affordances of their social and cultural environment to present their sons as martyrs for the cause of justice. Shahnaz has often posted images of herself ritually washing the grave of her son, Mustafa, which carries the inscription, the innocent martyr of Ashura. Ashura in the Shi'i calendar is the day of Imam Hussein's martyrdom at the Battle of Karbala. It was also the day of Mustafa Karim Begi's death during the 2009 Green Movement protest. So these elements of mourning ritual in the Shahnaz Akmali archive are affordances for the mediation of both biological and non-biological kinship. Returning to this photo of mothers in the sitting room together, it is important to note that human rights lawyer Narges Mohammadi, who was not long out of prison at this point, she's actually placed in the center. She's the fourth person from the right. She's holding a photo of one of the dead young men, but she's not his mother. So this form of kinship, which is solidaristic rather than blood-based, interweaves with the many iteration of a blood kinship in the room, but also with the lateral kinship of sisterhood that links the women, as Shahnaz posts often tell us. So my point is that these different forms of kinship, together with the respectable feminine sociality, the photographs of the sons in their frames, the dark mourning clothes, and the gendered domestic environment of the sitting room all constitute relational affordances. And these affordances combine with the intimate and mundane associations of Instagram to mediate a determined melancholic persistence that both invokes and disturbs convention. Most importantly, perhaps, it is through the affordances of this social media platform that this small gathering in a private space asserts its right to appear in public. So, so here I refer to Arendt's notion of the space of political appearance, where vulnerable embodied human beings assert their rights to have rights. So whereas Arendt restricted her conception of the space of political appearance to the physical space of the public square, such physical space has rarely been available to these women. And in that context, it is even more important that, as Butler tells us, the media constitute the scene in which bodies appear. So I've got just maybe 2 more minutes. I can get 2 more minutes. So we might say then that constructing the mediated scene of political appearance for these justice-seeking mothers and their audiences entails the transgressive and disruptive blurring of boundaries between a series of gendered spaces and frames. So the women's persistent affective practices of intimacy and melancholia blur the boundaries separating public and private, the living and the dead, kin and non-kin. And as Butler would point out, local and global. She says the media constitute the scene of political appearance in a time and a place that includes and exceeds its local instantiation. So, while Papayas has argued that the political practice of mourning is deterritorialized through its digital mediations, I would argue that in this Iranian visual archive, political mourning is continually and re-territorialized, as the relational affordances of online and offline environments are continually activated by the archive's intimate public. Perhaps the crucial boundary to mention in this context is one which both divides and brings together this intimate public. The boundary between the wider circle of anonymous strangers in Berlin's affective scene of identification and the inner circle of those who are not strangers but sisters. Thank you so much. Thank you again for listening to me. And sorry, I think I went slightly beyond the okay. So
thank you very much, Sara. That was really fascinating. I know we've got Jenny has joined us, I think. Are you still there, Jenny? Can you and I hope you caught most of Sara's presentation. It's do we have I'll ask something, and then Jenny, if she'd like to ask something, I can perhaps get the discussion going. I was fascinated by, I absolutely see that tension between I can never say this word, deterritorialization and re-territorialization.
I can't say it.
No, I had to think very carefully there. And I think that is fascinating. What I'm interested in, like Butler's grievability and so on, is, and I'm thinking of this through the lens of Australia's refugee policies, the institutional medias help construct the grievability. What's happening, even though this is a platform of Instagram, would it be fair to say that complex process of deterritorialization and reterritorialization, in a sense, gives this form of political action, or as you say, this person's private politics, its publicness, beyond the kind of narrow frames that institutionalized frames that Butler was discerning? Like, it seems to me that these women do speak to the world, as well as they're able to speak to the world and to the locality at the same time, in a way without Mr. Murdoch framing it for them. I don't want to idealize or romanticize Instagram. I'm just wondering how that impacts on Butler's hard line between who's grievable and who isn't. I mean, is that another disruption? That it's easier to get some kind of platform for grievability, not easier, but yeah, that this is a space where grievability can be expanded, or have I misunderstood you and that's what you were saying anyway?
Yes, it is exactly this platform, Instagram, is a place that grievability can be staged and popularized inside Iran. So it does have this universal, of course, aspect to it, Instagram. But at the same time, even it enables a sort of enables the ability of these mothers to expand their small physical space within the country. So if I understood your question correctly,
clearly expressed. Go on, thank you. Yeah, go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. So Instagram. So the question was whether Instagram or media affordances is enabling grievability on both like local and on both local and global levels, or
I guess what I'm thinking about is even the example you gave of the image of the young Syrian boy,
yes,
dead on the Greek beach, if I remember correctly, and the possible kind of if temporary impact that had on European publics and politics. But that's an example where it does actually escape and go. When I say escape, how can I put it? Okay, here in Australia, we've had bodies on beaches, we've had children behind wire, we've had children in prison, and they're all refugee children, for example. We've had women and men seriously traumatized through our refugee policies. But it's invariably been hard to escape the bounding of official media. It seems to some extent to have overpowered to some extent even the possibilities of social media, although not entirely. So and even with that photo, that heartbreaking image, it's still liable to be captured. Whereas this space, because it's happening outside of those formal structures, has more potential. I suppose that's what I'm saying. I'm fascinated by the possibilities of I'm also asking the question, how do you break into that transnational space? Because I would argue here in Australia, that's been very difficult in terms of the politics of humanitarian policies. Is that clear?
Yes, I think for me, yes. This is actually a very good question. Maybe I wonder if maybe I'm wondering if maybe I needed to make this clearer in my talk. I think when I'm talking about media affordances, when I'm trying to think about how this locality or their local practices is enabled by this transnational platform, I'm actually thinking how when I talk about transnationality, I'm not thinking of Western audiences. So basically, let's say Instagram or Shahnaz Akmali's Instagram is somewhere where people inside Iran actually go actively and seek information. So it has already established itself as a reliable source of information, as a reliable platform. So in that sense, yes, so it's not about actually, it's about local people or people inside Iran getting information instead of official media going to Shahnaz Akmali's platform, Instagram, in getting information or following up on the news, let's say. Even right now, the last 4 weeks, we've had a massive protest across the country. And you will still see Shahnaz Akmali's Instagram is where many people inside Iran actually go. So in that sense, I think, this local protest or local space, it has expanded because of this media affordances, but not because it's opening up to its Western audiences. Doesn't make sense. So it's actually it's looking at how I'm looking at how it's enabling people inside Iran to expand their space of political appearance, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It makes a lot of sense, and it's a bit clearer for me. I knew that would. I think it did come through that was your motivation. I suppose it raised the question for me about that transnational, the potential for not necessarily from this, in inverted commas, West to Iran, but solidarities that go beyond the West or do not include the West. But I guess what I get then is there's a real potential here in a state which has been very good at preventing much mobilization, although as we've seen in the last 4 weeks, anything can happen at any time. But that the possibilities of this transnational tool are then able to start building different imaginaries that don't require necessarily, or that can happen in the lounge room. I'm going to say her because I've lost her name, but I've forgotten the main case study's name, the woman who you've used. Can't see where I've written down her name, sorry. But her lounge room, in this incredibly intimate space is then almost like a sparkler going off in different ways because of that, because of the digital. It can escape, but where are its limits then? Because I quite take your point that you don't want to universalize or romanticize the possibilities of the digital. So what are the limits do you see any constraints on this, apart from the obvious one of state sanction? I know you said she went to jail for 12 months, the woman.
Constraints in terms of on this digital activism,
on the possibilities of this becoming, in conjunction with the grassroots action that's taking off now, and of course other forms of action, to actually become salient in destabilizing a regime such as the one in Iran. Are there still constraints on reinforcing norms in some ways, in normativity, or in not being able to build a counter force, an imagination counter force? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think yes, there are still limits. I think what they're doing. Okay, let's first start with this recent protest because I started following hashtags in relation to Mahsa Amini's death, and then I noticed how, as I said, the justice-seeking mothers, they're mainly working within a very specific context. They've lost their children, they're gathering, and by their mourning, they try to keep them, to basically hold the government accountable for it. This. But what they're doing right now is they're bringing in this hashtag or recent, Mahsa Amini's this. And creating connections between what they're doing and what's happening right now. So in that sense, what I'm trying to say is that their protests, digital platforms, they are of course subjected to local limitations. So they've been, going in and out of the jail. So from, I think the last 7-8 years, I've been following Shahnaz Akmali. She's been like half of the year she's in jail. So in a way you can say that still the physical limitations are pretty much there.
Yeah.
But now, but their audience, they have become popular. So they are established as this recognized oppositional group. But it has not made it, using digital space hasn't made it easier, if you like, for them inside Iran.
This is still highly dangerous and precarious.
It is precarious, absolutely. It's precarious, and all. But then what they're doing is how they're constantly, basically, what I'm trying to say is that justice seeking, their network, it has reached out to new audiences, but it hasn't changed their subjection to a state's limits or a state restrictions, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. I haven't said it very clearly, but
no, you are very clear. I think my answer wasn't really.
And of course, in light of what's happening now, that would have, with this current protest, apparently, from what I hear, you would know far more, led by young people, women as well as men. So that sense of the privateness of women's space is busted again. By the physical presence of women in the streets and burning their head coverings and so on, and cutting their hair. But so I really appreciate the way you've drawn that together. Are there any other questions, comments? Jenny, I don't know if you're still with us, if you have anything you'd like to ask. Maybe I can, how do you feel about what's going on in Iran at the moment with those protests? Do you think there will be a kind of tumbler effect? That might be an unfair question to ask you. And I was trying to avoid mention of what was happening in Iran because I wanted you to speak about yours. I thought it was a bit unfair to say, hey, you're therefore an expert on the current.
I'm actually very happy when I'm asked about it. I'm very happy because obviously it has been really difficult because I've got friends, family, relatives in Iran, and so it's been difficult to keep going here, speaking of this local global, but at the same time knowing that my friends are out there and I'm not there. But as you rightly pointed out, this generation Z, they're all very young, in their early 20s. They're out, and it has started. I would call it the feminist revolt, because I think this is a very intersectional, feminist intersectional revolt. And I think if you think about like 100, let's say 100 years, yes, a struggle of women in Iran and the Middle East over 100 years. I think this is the first time that we can see that women's issue has finally managed to be important or significant. Because in 1979,
No, go on.
Because I was thinking that in 1979, especially among leftists and political groups, women were told that, okay, this is not the right time. And I know it's not only to do with Iran. Gendered struggles have always been, secondary in nationalist or independent struggles in the Middle East. But this time it's different. And it had this intersectional potential. Now you can see that people like teachers are on a strike, or men, or as you said, men are supporting. So yeah, I would say that I think this is really unprecedented, exciting for all of us, especially my generation, who didn't manage to get to this point. But at the same time, I think, I think there's no going back, at least for women inside Iran. But one thing I wanted to mention was, again, going back to the local and global dimension of this protest. When I talk to activists inside Iran, at least in the first 2-3 weeks, they were often telling me that, oh my God, why no one is reporting? Why no one is talking about us? And we're in the street and no one is talking about this protest. And then here in academia, we are so worried because of this whole, this is how I felt, that because of this, far-right politics, because of the increasingly limited space for us to talk about, let's say, how migrants or migrants, asylum seekers are constantly criminalized. So sometimes if you see an image of a woman burning their scarf, then this can be used by, let's say, right-wing politicians as a sign of, look, this is not about Islamophobia in the West. We're actually, worried about this, worried about human rights abuse in Iran. So I think, I don't know if I'm making sense here,
yes,
but I'm trying to say that if we contextualize burning scarves inside Iran in its local context, then we see that it makes perfect sense. This is bodily restriction. But then when we take this example here in the West, of course, let's say in France, the whale is banned. So then in that context, it has a completely different meaning. So maybe this is one reason that Western media haven't really figured out how to intervene, or how to frame, or how to talk about this protests.
I think you're probably very right. Although I'm sure, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. There's been some coverage here in Australia, intermittent, in between finding out about your current prime ministers, and lettuces and things. But more seriously, there has been, but there's been some really constructive interventions into the public debate here immediately, as soon as it got covered, from women of Middle Eastern background, if I can say that, who've spoken out and said, look, what this is about is the right to do what you like with your body. It's not about you shouldn't wear the veil or you should. It's about the right to be able to choose. And I thought they were very timely, and I was really pleased that they were given a bit of an audience. I don't know how much they shouted down. They were heard in commercial worlds, but certainly the national broadcaster and certain spaces in podcasts and things, they were immediately onto it and speaking quite firmly about that. And we're in a slightly different moment now, perhaps briefly, in terms of the right-wing stuff. But I think the real thing is you've helped us understand the whole context within Iran and its significance in an Iranian and Middle Eastern context, which I think is good. And so useful, instead of putting it into the Western context all the time, or in relation to a Western context. So I really thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And I think your research, the sophistication of the models you've presented here today have been fabulous. So we will push this recording far and wide.
Oh.
And thank you for your time. I'll thank you for the centre, and let you get back to your mourning in Britain.
Yes, mourning. Thank you so much.
Look forward to reading your work in the future.
Thank you so much
No, thank
for
you.
having me. Thank you.